Hello and welcome to the first of 85 videos in which I take a look through the games of the BBC Micro and pick out 85 of my favorites. Now, you might think 85 is a rather large number to have of favorite games. If I'm being honest, it's really 85 of the games that I've played because that represents pretty much all the games that I have played on the BBC Micro. Most of them are games that I played as a child, growing up with a BBC Micro and later a BBC Master. But there are a few in the mix that I've only come to later on in life. There may be a few surprises for some of you Beeb fans out there about some of the games that I sadly didn't have the chance to play as a child and which I've actually only come to as an adult. But in this video, we're going to start in at number 85, and this is a game called Meteoroids, which actually didn't come from a commercial games publisher per se. It was a game that came in a book called The Giant Book of Games for Your BBC Micro, from Tim Hartnell and Ian Hutt, published by Fontana Publishing. Now, these kinds of books were fairly common back in the early 80s, and it was a book. There was no disc on the cover. It was just a book which you would buy, and inside there were pages and pages and pages of code for you to type in. And Meteoroids is one such game. It's from what I can remember, I mean, this is going back quite a long way now. I think I was about 5 or 6 years old. I had a copy of this book and given to me by my dad. And Meteoroids was one of the shorter games in there, and he had 50 lines of code. Well, it looked like 500 because BBC Basic is typically spaced in lines of 10. So it was one of those that, for my childish fingers was not too difficult to get typed in and saved and run. And that opened me up to the world of Meteoroids, the game. And that's what we're going to start off with here at number 85. So, without further ado, let's take a look at Meteoroids. Here we are. This is our splash screen. Nice bit of colour at the top there in picking out the individual letters, showcasing the fact that this is in one of the mode resolutions which had the most colours actually on the BBC Micro. It was also the same mode that was used for teletext, for those of you who remember what that was. So it's a neat little program, as our introduction tells us. You will pilot your V-wing, and you'll see that it is very literally a V-wing once we get going. Only got two controls on this game, Z and X, to move yourself right and left, the traditional controls of a BBC Micro game. And really, it's a game of endurance. So how long can you last? And the game tells you, how many light years you've travelled at the end. So let's take a look. Okay, so it lets you press the key when you're ready to start. So here we go. So as you can see, our spacecraft here is just literally the character V, the V-wing as the oh my goodness, 63 years. That's not very good, is it? And our asteroid field is in fact an asterisk field. So no graphics are actually used in the rendering of this game. It's all just using the standard keys in the character set for the BBC Micro. So, not the most astonishing thing to look at, I appreciate, but, not a bad little game. And when you consider that to put something like this together, you needed just 50 lines of basic, it's really not that bad. It's a fairly simple gameplay, but at the same time quite addictive as well. Because it tells you how many light years you get at the end, it sort of makes you feel like, well, I'm sure I could do better than say 77. And so you just keep playing and seeing how much further could you get. It kind of puts me in mind of some of the early sort of games that people used to have on Nokia phones. Things like Snake and the like. Nothing special from a graphics point of view, but just something quite addictive, quite easy to pass the time. Doesn't not too taxing from a sort of brain power point of view, but quite a delightful little game. And I think the fact that it really doesn't take much code to produce it kind of adds to the glory of it as a game. Oh, 213, that's not bad. And it's on an infinite loop, so you could, if you were really good at this game, you could really go for the sort of endurance test and see really how long you can go, because the game won't ever stop until you crash, which, as I seem to be doing quite frequently. Um, Now, it's got its flaws. You can see that the ship that we're piloting, it flashes on the screen um, every pretty much every frame, and that's to do with the way in which the game is being rendered in the code. Now, as I said, only 50 lines of code, so you can't expect too much with that. And it's using a bit of a sneaky function within the code to enable the appearance of things moving on the screen. But in fact, it just keeps re-rendering line by line, and that's why our ship is also flickering as it moves along, and changing color as well, because the changes in color are actually being rendered. If you look at each line, you'll notice that the lines of asterisks are all the same color, but because they move so quickly, it gives the illusion that it's a multicolored asterisk field, so to speak. The other thing as well, it doesn't have a Hall of Fame. So once you've crashed, you get a little message telling you how many light years you've traveled, but you'll just have to remember, because the game doesn't actually store it. Um, Another thing which is quite amusing is if you line up your ship and crash. Oh no, that wasn't such a good example. Let's see if we can get it to do what I have in mind. There you go. If you crash your ship on the far side, you end up with V-bang at the top there, which I find perversely amusing. So yeah, this is Meteoroids. Nothing overly amazing as games go. Certainly not the best that the Beeb can offer by any stretch. I mean, it is in at number 85 at the bottom, largely because it isn't a particularly complex game, doesn't have any sound, doesn't really have any graphics, since it's just using the character set to render the ship and the asteroids. But I think it's a really good place to start this listing of top 85 games for the micro, because it shows what's possible, and for me personally, this game opened up the whole world of programming. I actually got into programming on a BBC Micro exactly from this. Taking a game listing from a magazine or a book, um, typing it in, and then, having done that, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes it could be frustrating, particularly if the game had many, many lines of code. But once you had it up and running, first of all, there was, a sense of pride that you'd managed to get this thing going. But on top of that, it was a really great position to build on. So, this game doesn't have any graphics, it doesn't have any sound. But once you figured out the code for, rendering things like pictures and sound effects, you could take the base of a game like Meteoroids and adapt it. And then you could actually turn this game into something that looked a bit more impressive, and maybe had a few sounds to go with it as well. And it really was just a really great way of getting kids like myself into programming. The fact that you really did have to type it in yourself, you couldn't download it or load it off a disk. It was something which, if you wanted to play this game, you better be prepared to put the time in to type it in correctly as well, because one mistake would cause the whole thing not to run, or sometimes produce some unexpected side effects. But yeah, I think if we're going to be looking at games on the Beeb, I think one of the sort of big things about the BBC Micro was that it was ultimately designed to be an educational machine. And the fact that it got people like me and many others into programming from quite an early age is a testament to the power of the machine, and it's really one of the main reasons why I'm such a big fan of it as computers go, and why I keep coming back to it all these years later. So there it is, in at number 85, Meteoroids, from the Fontana Publishing Company. And that's where we're going to start. I hope you'll join me through this series of videos as we work our way up from 85 all the way up to the top. Um, Meteoroids has been a good start, but there's plenty more excitement in the rankings to come. So that's it for Meteoroids. I'm going to say no to another go and leave it there. So join me next time for number 84.